can I request Murtaza Shibli sir to start from his end? Then we will move to the parliament.
Thank you very much, Raja Sahab, for organizing this event. Parliamentarians, lords, excellencies, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Before I point out the current human rights situation, I wanted to take on from what Lord Ahmed said about things about the politics. I think we need to keep in mind that continuing Kashmir dispute for the last 65 years, it has mutated beyond its raison d'etre, what was before as a territorial dispute, talking about self-determination, moving to a different plane where now Hindu fundamentalists or Muslim fundamentalists on the other side both talk about Kashmir as being part of some sort of quasi-religious identity for them. For example, people have talked about, particularly after 9/11, a lot about Islamic terrorism, Islamic movements, etc. But we fail to recognize the potential of Kashmir's non-resolution and giving constituency to Hindu extremists in India and terrorism. Now even Indian newspapers talk about Hindu terrorism regularly, and one of their preferred solutions is ethnic cleansing. And we need to go back to history in 1947 to see that this ethnic cleansing was implemented, particularly in Jammu, where more than 100,000 Muslims were killed. And as a reaction, there was ethnic cleansing of Hindus and Muslims in Azad Kashmir as well, and we need to recognize that as well, that there was a lot of movement of people on the basis of religious affiliations. Although massacre was very brutal in Jammu side, where it's believed that it had a tacit approval of the Indian Army. Exactly similar things are happening. Congress leader floated an idea of trifurcation of Jammu and Kashmir just 2 days back. And for me, as a Kashmiri, it was very alarming for me. First, it allows Hindu extremists their dream of fulfilling this and provoking them into another ethnic cleansing. First of all, the very statement is ethnic cleansing involving, because it fails to respect diversity of people in Jammu and Ladakh. In Jammu region is not Hindu dominated by any sense. Out of 6 districts, 4 districts are Muslim, but they have been on the receiving end of Hindu militia groups who have been armed by Indian Army and intelligence. So we need to be very careful. I was surprised that some of Kashmiri leaders even welcomed that statement. So we need to, in order to deny any extremism, religious extremism, any constituency, we need to be very careful about what we are going into, which are proposed as benign political solutions are actually very dangerous, and we need to, it's against very much against the community cohesion which everybody of us is trying to achieve in Jammu and Kashmir. Coming back to current situation, as Lord Ahmed mentioned, about the civilian killings, we have more than 120 understood civilian killings who cannot be blamed by any chance of being any militant at all. Although the Indian government tried it, I'll go back to later. This is during the last 6 months, but the peak period was when 111 were killed in 3 months period, when these mainly teenagers, who we call as children of conflict because they were born in conflict, they were born perhaps in a hospital which was half occupied by the army. Then they went to the school which was perhaps half occupied by the army again, because I was educated at the school I went, half of that was also occupied by the Indian Army. Then they went to the college I went to, it is still half occupied by the Indian Army in Islamabad. Then perhaps some of them went to the university, where again army was everywhere surrounding us. Even I would open my door and I would see bunkers and security forces. So these children, they had no recourse to anything but army brutality, and they have no place to play either, because Indian Army has occupied hundreds of thousands of hectares of land, whether it is playgrounds, football grounds, orchards, agricultural land. So these are very frustrated youth who see being humiliated on day-to-day basis, and then they protest against humiliation, they are killed, and then the cycle, the spiral of killings continues. We have to understand that these killings have happened, although Indian government has claimed many times that the Indian army has fired in self-defense, but that is and they are trying to cull rather than kill. But the overwhelming medical evidence from doctors attending these people is that most of these people have received injuries in their heads, blood wounds, or chest. So the main aim is to kill these people rather than to control them. Another side of this last 6 months has been more than 3,000 people have been injured. Some of them really badly. Many of them have lost limbs, severe. Some of them have severe spinal injuries, rendering them useless and motionless for the rest of their life. Another aspect of this is if we see hospitals have hardly any medical supplies because of the continuous curfew and some economic blockade in some shape or the other. Hospitals, this is not a fire alarm. No, okay, that's all right. Otherwise I was thinking of jumping up.
We'll start again in a minute.
Oh, that's good. For the last 6 weeks or so, the public demonstrations have gone on the back foot. There are less public demonstrations, but what has continued is arbitrary arrest of Kashmiri youth. Anybody who has been taking part in these demonstrations has been arrested, hunted down, and then they have been put behind bars for 2 years through Public Security Act, which is draconian that you don't have to produce them in courts for 2 years, which is very sad again. One of the very important things we have to notice this time was a different shift of Indian elite. How they classified these public demonstrations is that India adopted an uncompromisingly militant posture against Kashmiri civilians. Even the Indian Home Minister linked these stone-throwing youths to Lashkar-e-Taiba. Even India's Home Secretary asked journalists not to call them innocent civilians, but people bent on violence. One of the army generals coined a term called agitational terrorism, which is, one has to understand the mindset, which is very dangerous. When you say people coming back, students demonstrating outside Parliament, you call it agitational terrorism. This shows how militant mindset is, and it is very dangerous again. And this denial of civilian status to the Kashmiri victims has even enraged Indian civil society and journalists who have written many critical pieces. This is the latest for the last 6 months, but during the last 20 years, more than 100,000 people have been killed, civilians. I'm not talking about combatants on either side. There have been more than 100 massacres. When I say massacres, it means any act where army or paramilitary has killed more than a dozen people, ranging up to scores of people. And I witnessed one of them in my own hometown on 22nd of October 1992. Indian paramilitaries killed 47 people in Bijbehara. I was there, I reported it as a journalist that time, and then I couldn't go home for 6 months because the army was looking for me. Similarly, several of my friends have lost lives, including my own relatives, my cousins. They were going to college, they were killed. Now, another aspect of these human rights violations in the last 20 years is we have more than 10,000 missing people who were simply arrested by the army, paramilitary forces, and we don't know about their fate. I can mention at least two of one of my very close friend, Farooq Ahmed Bhatt, who was working with me on Bijbehara massacre, the one I mentioned in my hometown, and suddenly he was arrested in broad daylight by the army. We never heard about him. Then another of my just next door neighbor, he was a professor, a retired professor, he was suspected of having links with militants because his son was one. And for the last 15 years we haven't heard anything. Last year, Indian Kashmiri, when I say Indian Kashmiri, some Indian civil society members and Kashmiri civil society groups worked and researched about...
Last one.
Was the reason for these human rights violations is because we have a lot of army here, more than 700,000. That is one of the, because of the daily interface between army and security and civilian population. Then we have draconian laws like Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which gives immunity to the Indian Army. What can we do here? I think we can perhaps make a forum of Kashmiri organizations that can have direct contact with Indian civil society, because I believe that that's a very important one, which is based on reconciliation rather than taking a very hard line. Rather, we should seek influence through Indian civil society and intelligentsia. Another thing is perhaps Indian politicians. Just 2 days back, one of the Indian parliament members said that we can't afford, that they have been misled and Kashmiris are living in a cage. So these are very positive developments, and we can perhaps work on that here. And we should seek grander reconciliation without compromising Kashmiri's right to self-determination and dignity. And Pakistan is doing this. For example, they have done certain very positive steps in Gilgit-Baltistan. They're still committed to talk to India, and they have done it previously as well, moved from their position. And I hope Indian politicians can do that as well, and perhaps we can help in creating that solution and creating that position in future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.